Okay, I think we're going to get started. We are very excited to continue the conversation we had about a month ago, shining a spotlight on Black women. My name is Lisa Kaplowitz. I am the Executive Director and co-founder of the Rutgers Center for Women in Business. I'm also a finance professor here at Rutgers Business School. The Center for Women in Business works with companies and organizations to develop and advance women leaders through education, opportunity, and thought leadership. We remove barriers, build community, and empower women with skills and confidence to succeed as business leaders. If you go to the QR code at the bottom, please connect with us on our LinkedIn page. With me, I have my co-moderator, Anastasia Bailey. She is a professor in the Management and Global Business Department, focusing on the intersection of international business and entrepreneurship. Our esteemed panelists who are joining us again are Cheryl Clark, Chief Officer in Charge, UN Resident Audit Office of Kuwait. And she is a former CFO, International Audit Executive, evaluator, and Chief Operations Manager at a bunch of different companies globally through the Caribbean, Europe, Africa, and the US. She earned her Rutgers MBA and is a proud Jamaican resident residing in New Jersey. Next, we have Natasha Heming. She is the CEO of Girl Scouts Heart of New Jersey and the first African-American woman to lead the organization. She is a lifetime Girl Scout and member of Girl Scout USA's DEI and Racial Justice Steering Committee. She has been honored as the top 25 leading women entrepreneur in New Jersey, made ROI New Jersey's 2020 influencers, people of color list, South Jersey's business women to watch, and much, much more. She earned her Master's of Public Administration from Rutgers as well. Next, we have Toka Rutherford. She is a managing director at Chase Consumer and Community Banking. She currently runs the digital self-services and is the product owner for that, responsible for making sure that all of us who bank at Chase have an optimal digital experience. She has had her lifelong career at JP Morgan, has previously headed up business engineering, has been the chief development officer for the consumer banking division and the auto finance tech division. She serves on the D&I Council, JP Morgan, Black Executives Forum, and numerous other organizations as well. She earned her Bachelor's of Science in Industrial Engineering from Rutgers. So with that, I think I got everybody right, Anastasia? Awesome. So we had such a powerful dynamic conversation last time where we only got through our successes, which was incredible. And I don't want to minimize or diminish those successes at all, because it's hard enough to get to that executive level for anybody. It's that much harder for a woman. And it's that much harder for a person of color. And it's that much harder for the intersection of a woman of color. So just a huge kudos, shout out to all that you have accomplished in your careers. I know it was not easy. Now, I'd love to turn the conversation over to the work that we all need to do. So to talk about some of our challenges and then what we all can do to help move the needle forward. Before I turn it over to Anastasia, just a couple housekeeping things. The chat function is open. We encourage everyone to post your questions, add comments. We want this to be engaging as possible, even though we are in a virtual environment. This will be recorded and it will be posted on our website. I also encourage all of you to check back on our website. If it's not posted there, it will be in the next week. Our conversation that we had a month ago, and it's also on our YouTube channel as well. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Anastasia to get us started on our first question.
Yeah, so thank you, Lisa. It was fantastic learning about each of you, sharing about the successes and really getting into that conversation. So making the shift, the question then, as Lisa already mentioned, is shifts, changes that you felt that you had to make in order to succeed, that were specific to your gender, that were specific to your race that you felt you had to make that maybe others didn't have to make? Did you feel you had to make some shifts?
I'll kick us off then. So, I mean, yes, right? Yes, for sure. Especially in an industry that's dominated by men. For me in particular, it's like, how do I show up in those moments? And so, you know, certainly early on in my career, it was like the notion of how to speak up, share my ideas, and how to leverage my, you know, insight in a way that would be received. And, you know, I think we've all had those moments where you share an idea and then someone restates it and gets the credit for it. And so how you bounce back from those moments are really important as well, because, you know, it's definitely frustrating when that happens. You feel like you were manipulated somehow, or, you know, didn't get respected in that moment. But the key to that is, how do you then respond knowing that that happened? And, you know, that it's not like something that would lead to burning bridges, but how do you build bridges from that moment? And I think, you know, for me in particular, I've had to like hone that over the years. And then you get confident in it. And then, you know, when we have that seat at the table, certainly for me, it's like, you know, speak up. And interestingly, I don't know if you all saw this week, but the New York Times wrote an article on speaking up. Why is it so difficult for women of color? And I think, you know, certainly having lived it, it is that psychological safety. It is, you know, how do I ensure I don't get disrespected, demeaned, or just like challenged, and then it feels personal. And so that's another thing I've had to hone and focus on over the time, is like not taking things personally, really trying to remove, you know, the personal from it, and really try to stay fact-based or empirical. I'm an engineer, so how do I stay fact-based in that moment so that it doesn't, you know, sort of degenerate into something emotional or personal? And so those are all like kind of resiliency ideas over the years I've had to build upon, and that has been the shift over time.
I think I will chip in now. For me, as a woman and as a woman of color, I think the greatest challenge that I had to overcome was that, in fact, as a mother and having a career and going to school, because my family started fairly early. So being an independent woman and being a strong woman of color, you want to think that you can do this on your own. But in fact, it is not so. You have to, me personally, I had to rely a lot on family. I had to rely on the extended family, my mother, the system, my aunts, my sisters, to ensure that I needed to be in a safe place, and I needed, and I could get things done. So, for example, I am not also a woman that bashes men, because one of my chief support and cheerleader has been my partner. He was there, for example, when the children were there. I did my first degree, but I'm also a chartered accountant, both with ACC and CPA, UK and US. So in doing this, I was actually working at the time. So I had to be, and you know, Lisa, you can relate to this, being in the accounting field. And at this time, I was not a senior person. I was a junior person with other persons, men, women, sometimes who do not understand. There were days when I worked 7 days per week in order to get my financials out of the month end. In audit periods, I had to work long, very long hours and weekends. And without the family support, especially because as a Black woman, we normally are accustomed to relying on family. But sometimes as women, we think that, okay, to be a strong woman, I can do this on my own. I don't need the support. But to be honest with you, we cannot do it without the support system. So, and particularly when you have to make sure that ethically you are above board, you're doing everything properly, you have to also rely on your spiritual background in order to push through, and that hope, and know that it will be better. You're doing this for a purpose. There is a cause to it. There is light at the end of the tunnel. So there were numerous days, for example, while my partner would be supporting me in the week, for example, to getting the children to school, doing all the extracurricular activities as a woman, and doing all of that. On weekends, when I do still have to turn up and perform at work, sometimes my children were with me. They all knew the children at the office, because on weekends, that extended support was also available to me at the office. So it is very important to me now, from where I stand, where I can see, for example, the younger generation coming up, to ensure that I, as a woman who went through all of this, can also give them that support, so that that challenge for them will not maybe as hard as it was for me. And that I think we have to be very, 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 very conscious as women, particularly of women of color, looking out for that younger generation who do have those challenges in supporting their family, making sure that they continue their education, making sure that they do have that life support, that we do extend a helping hand to them as well.
And Natasha, before we move to you, Cheryl, that is such a critical point. And I struggled with that throughout my own career as well, because I always thought if I have to ask for help, then that means I'm doing something wrong and I should be able to do it all. And that's not possible, especially, and look, you have a partner, I have a partner, not everybody has a partner. Exactly. So for those folks that are single parents, this period of COVID, and you have young kids, this is impossible. Like there's, and so I actually had my husband, we moved to Central Jersey, 1.5 miles from his parents. I'm probably the only daughter-in-law who would ever suggest that in the history of the world. But I joke, I'm lucky my husband could have picked a better wife, but he couldn't have picked a better daughter-in-law for my mother-in-law. That's a separate conversation. But they were so helpful. My father-in-law went to the mommy and me classes when the kids were little because I was working. And the only way I could do what I did, and Cheryl, what you could do, what you did, was because you had the support system. Like, it literally does take a village. You need the tribe. And it doesn't mean that you are not capable or qualified. I still need to tell myself this. It's very hard to ask for help, but people like to help. They want to feel needed. And it's helping the overall, your mental health, and it's helping you get ahead, and you're going to pay it back forward as soon as you can as well. So I just wanted to pause on that because I think it's something we as women in general do not do a good enough job with, is asking for help.
I'll just add on there that it is extremely important that my family surrounds me in everything that I do in this girl serving organization. My husband, Okello, is a Girl Scout leader, along with other mothers. When I took on this job, I was a volunteer for the council before I started this job. And when I became the CEO, he then was my backup to take my place with the troop when I stepped away. And so it was extremely important for continuity's sake with the troop, because he was doing activities with them, and it was a huge support to me. I would have never even applied for this job were it not for the strength and support and pushing and encouragement and praying with my husband and my parents. it just wouldn't have happened. So I completely agree with you, Cheryl, that family is everything, and it really is the life support. This job is extremely stressful. So there are times when my husband will come in, or, and say, okay, you're not cooking tonight. You've been here with our 3 children who are all teenagers doing homeschooling, and you're about to go out to a cookie booth in the morning. You're not cooking tonight. Your mom's coming over and she's making, cuckoo and flying fish, or, frying some chicken, or, doing something for our house. And that support, knowing that I'm feeding my children, I'm staying close to my parents, is what gives me some solace and some confidence that there isn't anything that I can't do. I also have the benefit of leading a girl serving organization. So I'm an advocate for girls. I'm an advocate for women's issues. And I stand as an example for not only my daughters, but the 32 girls that were a part of my Girl Scout troop to follow. So the job in itself is difficult. And I share with them quite often that it's difficult, and it's I can do this, and I'm showing you that you can do this too, is the example that I'm setting, that there isn't any challenge that can put before you that with the help of your family, your troop mates, your support system, that you can't do.
So just sticking on this point just a little bit longer, expanding this concept of care for yourself, right? And you have your tribe. I love the conversation in the chat about the importance of your networks, which sometimes is you have to cultivate that and then hope that it is robust and in a way that not everybody has it. So that there's a networks aspect. But what can you also talk about the individual self-care, which is sometimes something that also gets lost in the conversation, but there are studies that show for Black women, and women especially, self-care is important and correlated with resilience, success, a number of values. So could you share with us if that's been the case for you? Did you make that type of realization? Is that incorporated into your work life and personal life?
I started this job 3 years ago. And even before this job, I had cohorts of women and civic groups that I was a part of. I'm also a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Shout out to my soror and co-panelists, Toka Rutherford on this panel. But those networks are like air and water and survival and food for me. And when I don't remember to take care of myself, I will most often have a text message with a prayer from a soror in the morning. I will have a shout out on WhatsApp from my Girl Scout CEO network saying, you're doing a good job, or, I'm thinking about you. I get packages here from my friends who know how difficult the job is to remind me, did you take a walk? Here are some, laces for your sneakers. Make sure that you put them in so that next week you can remember to take half an hour for yourself and walk up and down the block. That self-care is so important because the stress can be so intense, especially when I know that I am working 10 times harder than the woman who sat in the seat before me. So self-care is critical. My prayer group, my sorority sisters, my family, my CEO sister network are all a part of how I take care of myself and remind myself that I should be taken care of.
Yeah, wow. It's like, where do we start? We could probably use the rest of the time talking about self-care. I know for me, I would say it's certainly been a journey in terms of even just as you age, right? So for me, early on, especially working on Wall Street, I know at least it's long hours. I mean, it's a grind, it's long hours, it's just expected. You sacrifice your weekends, you sacrifice nights, you're constantly on. And it's hard to, like, when you're young, you don't really think about the debt you are incurring over time in terms of whether it's relationships or even sleep and rest and healthy. Today's World Sleeping Day, by the way. So healthy sleeping habits, which I certainly struggled with after, you know, just sort of abusing sleep for so many years, and then having 3 children, you know, and all that that bears. And so, you know, you really, for me personally, it was like, I was just confronted with, you have to take better care of yourself, because exhaustion is showing up in so many ways in my life, and the quality of whether it's the relationships, my work, or as the different hats I wear, the roles I play, you know, I'm not fully present. And so I've really been on, you know, sort of over the last few years, journeys around being present, you know, not necessarily overvaluing multitasking, even though we're great at it. It's like, oh, on one, and that, like, simple tidbits like that help with mental health. And one of my, as Sora Natasha mentioned, there's just different circles. Certainly my sorority sisters, my line sisters, we are so tight, 15 of us. We have a group chat. I have sister friends in different industries. That I have diverse networks. I always tell people when we talk about diversity, it's like, who's in your tribe? Who's that, when you are running into professional challenges, it can't just be people that look like you. It has to be diverse. And so how do you now have people that pour into you in ways that allow you to thrive? And so those moments, I think people don't realize, and I have to quote the famous T. Duckett, she's like, people know your glory, but not your story. And it's like, they see the greatness or the things that are noteworthy, but they don't see what happens in between the dash. And that's so important for us to realize, that we have to invest in our own self-care, mental health. I meditate. I have a girlfriend who says every moment is as it should be. And it's like acceptance is part of the journey too. And not like beating ourselves up for things that happened that didn't go well, but recognizing that this is part of the journey. I've learned to be content. Certainly for me spiritually, I have an amazing, I'm married to a pastor. We have an amazing church family. There's just so many different networks that nourish who I am. Certainly my children do the same, even though, you know, they withdraw a lot, they deposit a lot into me as well, validating that I'm on the right path, or when I'm on the wrong path, when to get right. So I think just all of those dimensions are important. We talked about the tribe and the help that we need. It's just part of life. And we have to realize we cannot do it alone. And to help us thrive, not just survive, right? Thrive. We had so much trauma last year to survive through. And that's when we need each other even more. And so leaning on that has been really vital for me, certainly from, you know, this last year, because I know we're going to start talking about some of the more recent things that are going on that we have to contend with.
Okay, for me though, I think it has been ingrained in me, and I think that is coming from my mother, because we are women and we are Black, we are women of color. So my mother has always been conscious that there are certain inherent things that we may be prone to, diabetes, high blood pressure, things like that. So from a very, very early age, although I was very busy, we were trained to eat properly. We were not trained to reach for the chips and the sweets. We were trained to eat a balanced, full meal. We were trained to eat, well, I'm from the Caribbean, so I do have my fresh fruits, so I can climb my tree, get my fruits. You can get the coconut water, you can get all of those stuff. So we were trained, those were our snacks. So we were trained to eat properly. We were also trained to make sure that we are outside, we're fresh air, and we also, so that part of self-care has been ingrained into my being. So it became an habit. So I am athletic, so I was always involved in sports. So that was made it even more important that I ate properly. I had my vitamins, even though I'm eating properly. So, and I've always been a sleeper, I must admit. I do fall asleep. And that was, I struggled with, in fact, when I had to be working and studying for my chartered accountant professional qualifications. So I do sleep. So that was not what I struggled with. But what has been very important, and we need to be very conscious of this, and we need to ingrain this in our children as well, that they eat properly. You don't go for the quick meals, even though you're a busy mother. You don't go for the quick meals. You make sure you yourself eat a balanced diet, so a balanced meal. So even though I'm at work and I'm busy, I'm in meetings all day, I know that if what I try to do is I actually cook the meal and take it with me to the work. So people will come into my office and they will say, oh, Cheryl, that meal looks lovely, because I have my soup, I have my vegetables, I have my protein, I have a little bit of carbs, because I'm also very conscious of the weight. And then I have my dessert. I have a fruit, or I do have my sweet, a slice of cake. But that comes only after I know that I have had a balanced meal. Also, it is very important that for my daily routine is my devotions, whoever you worship, to bring that in. So you self-isolate yourself. Get self-centered, you get grounded in whoever your faith is. I'm a very spiritual person. So that aspect is also there. I also try, in terms of myself, to calm myself, I do listen to music. So that, in fact, calms me and bring me to a place where I can, in fact, concentrate. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I did in terms of when I'm was going for my CPA exams, before any exam, I will have my headphones and my music. So it clears my mind. It brings me to a place of praise and beautiful, and I forget everything until I go in the exam, and that paper, everything comes back. So that sort of self-care I also have brought to my children. I've brought it, I've always, even at this point, I do my exercise, I do my walk, I do practice my yoga, where I can stretch and bring myself also to a centered place. And of course, like Toka and Natasha, the family support, the support is always there to make sure that if I fall off, I do fall off, someone is there to remind me, what is that you're eating? You're putting on weight. And sometimes we as women don't like to hear that, but sometimes we need to hear that. So it brings us back to make sure that we are looking after ourselves. So in times like these, you can survive the storm at a better probability of surviving. For example, COVID, no guarantee, but it makes me in myself, I feel better, I feel more energized, and it makes me able to tackle the world.
So there's also one other thing that I want to add to this conversation, and that is about setting boundaries. It's important for us as women and as Black women to set boundaries and clear boundaries. I work with an incredible executive assistant, Tiffany, who knows where I am at every moment of the day. And we have an unwritten contract, really, that is, if I'm going to be out or in a meeting until 9, 10 o'clock at night, she's not scheduling anything for me at 8 a.m. the next day. That is a clear boundary to make sure that I'm getting enough sleep to be ready for the next day. I also have boundaries around what I will not miss with my children. I have a senior in high school who's getting ready to graduate, who is an incredible competitive gymnast. As her mom, and even in this job, There is not a bleacher that has not seen my butt on it when she is competing, because it is very important for me and her and our relationship that I'm there to support her and lift her up and dry her tears when she falls, or, you know, to encourage her to go from one event to the next and leave whatever happened on the other apparatus behind her. That is critical and extremely important for her to see her mother there in support of her. So there are boundaries that I have even set with Tiffany on my calendar that if my daughter has a meet, mommy is there. So even in this time of COVID and spectators are limited or they can't be there, you best believe that I will be on the stream first thing in line to watch her compete. She has a meet today at 4 o'clock. And we made sure that we stacked my calendar this week so that by 3 o'clock, when she's getting on the bus to go to her competition, her mom is waving her off and away. So boundaries are also critical and important.
And as a follow-up with that as well, is that we as women, we look about everybody else. We look about the children, we look about the husband, we are leaders, so we have the staff that take care of us. Ensure that you have at least one person who will look out for you. My sisters spoke about their sorority, they spoke about your partners. Just make sure that you have at least one person who is going to be looking out for you as well, to make sure that you are okay.
Miriam just asked a question in the chat, which I think is really important. So Natasha, what you're doing is phenomenal. I know I personally struggled with setting boundaries. I have them and then they disappear and go away in 2 seconds. And so, and Cheryl, you kind of touched on this, but how do you create that discipline to listen to yourself and know where others end and then you begin? How do you actually do that? I kind of want to know too.
So this is so great because boundaries are one of the hardest things I think to get discipline around. And especially as women, like I love both Natasha and Cheryl's expressions of like how it shows up in their life, because sometimes people don't even know what boundaries look like. And I think that's like a good starting point, because it's like, well, how does that look? Because what looks right for Natasha may not look right for me and vice versa, right? And same thing. So I think that's important. One thing, and it's interesting because boundaries help create pathways to promotion and to other opportunities. And I think people look at boundaries as limits, but they are actually self-imposed constraints, right? You see the engineer coming out of me. Self-imposed constraints that you put on yourself to encourage that discipline. And so I remember when I was going through the process to get promoted to managing director, which is like extremely difficult, certainly. And I didn't necessarily have like role models, Black women in technology to look up to like in many respects, I was creating my own pathway. And the executive at the time that was investing in my promotion, said to me, how are you managing your time? And so like I went through like all these things because, we equate busyness with importance. And then he asked me, well, when do you have thinking time? And I was like, at night after I put the kids to bed. Like, I mean, it was obvious that I was spreading myself too thin. And so having someone that can kind of check you on, boundaries. And I remember, I'm like, how does he show up on time for every meeting? And he's like, always seems like just things are smooth for him. And he's like, I block time in my calendar, like Natasha said, right? I mean, it was just like, I don't do back-to-back meetings, or when I do, I make sure I protect the space like Natasha described. If I'm going to work late one night, the next morning is going to be my, time to think and get structured or reorganized. So that's the part about they don't know your story. The other, they see the goodness of how you operate or behave, but not necessarily the work in between or the things that you've said no to create the capacity to do those things. And so one of the things that has helped me in that moment, actually, I was like, okay, how am I going to solve for this? Got to figure it out. And so, you know, one of the things he challenged me with was, what are you going to change? Change one thing. What are you going to change? And of course, you know, now I'm like, okay, what is the one thing, right? Like, how do I get down to one? And you know, his advice was, ask each stakeholder that's important to you in this, what you need to change to show up better, right, in the role you play with that person. And so I ended up actually creating like a stakeholder matrix, again, the engineer in me. So I created a stakeholder matrix, and that allowed me to look at power and interests, right? And say, okay, well, how am I spending my time with those individuals, right? And the framework allowed me to see things like, who do I need to monitor relationships with? Who do I need to keep satisfied? Who do I need to keep informed? And who do I need to manage closely? And what I did was I then charted out the people in those quadrants, and I realized where my mismatches were. And that allowed me to adjust how I spent my time. And it gave me a framework for who to say no to and who to say yes to. And it wasn't just about the who, but it was also about the what, you know, what it is, because the relationship ebbs and flows over time. And so it's important because sometimes the relationship needs to shift. And so until you like review what that relationship or that stakeholder relationship is, you know, it's hard to reset. And so for me, I was like, I need something that helps me with that decision making. And so I ended up just creating that tool, and that has helped me with my calendar management. It's helped me to figure out how to manage who to say no to and why, or just not now, or just for now. This is the case. It doesn't mean forever. And so I think that also is important for us to time bound what those decisions are, because sometimes we find ourselves like, I can't say no because then it'll deteriorate my relationship forever. Well, no, actually, the no may be for now because I need space, and then we can come back to it. And so, Lisa, I don't know if that helps, because I found myself, I've had those moments of how do I like have discipline in my boundaries, but that certainly helped me to have someone to check me on it, and then create a framework to help me make better decisions and to be grounded in the response.
No, I think that's great. And one of my personal New Year's resolutions was I'm going to say no to something once a week, which sounded really harsh to me. And so I started doing it, and you know what? People didn't hate me, and I wasn't fired. And that was scary, right? And so so I think that is great advice. Cheryl, I know you want to say something, and then we want to switch gears to make sure we have time for one other topic that we think is really important.
Yeah, I think Toka touched on it a bit in terms of maybe because we say boundaries, people might see it as a negative connotation. And we have to be very careful, especially as women, when we say, okay, all this women rights era where we're standing up for our rights. This is very, very important. We do want respect, but we also must understand that we need to also respect others, particularly our men, in terms of making sure that they themselves are okay. But Toka did mention it in terms of boundaries. It's not cast in stone, and it is not set in time. Boundaries is at the place that you are at this particular moment. So today my boundaries will be X, but tomorrow it may go to a little bit further, or it may even retract and go in. So we have to be very careful that we do not just say we are setting boundaries, and then whatever happens, I'm just not going to do it. I'm not going to say no. If my husband actually wants to come and have dinner or something, no, I'm not going to do it because this is my boundary. As a woman, we have to be very, very careful about things like that. So it is not cast in stone. We need to reevaluate and reassess ourselves periodically, on a timely basis, to ensure that the boundaries is relevant to where we are today, or even for a week or for this year as you set your New Year's resolutions. But as women, we have endless possibilities and we have endless talents, and we are masters of everything. So we have to be very careful, because a lot of people do rely on us. But in relying on us, we need to ensure that we are looking after ourselves in the process as well.
No, Cheryl, I think that's really important. I think we should channel Natasha's daughter. I was a D1 gymnast as well. And so I always say, you know, I leverage my athletic experience, and flexibility is one of them. And I think that's what you're really getting at right here as well. Want to switch gears for 1 second. And Anastasia, I might want to ask you this question as well. You know, stuff I've read, Black women feel less included, not comfortable bringing their full self, less than 1 in 3 have sponsors, are less likely to believe that some of the company's diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are actually as effective as white people do. After, and not to ask you to do one more thing, but after folks who don't identify with whatever population it is that we're trying to advance, in this case, we're talking about Black women, after folks have read the books, after folks have looked at the research, knowing everyone is different, for you, we talked about leveraging our network, our community, our tribe. For you, what does that look like? How can your colleagues help support you, help advance you throughout your career and life in general at work? Who wants to start?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
Oh, go, Natasha.
So, you know, for me, I'll just take one part of it. And the part of it that I want to take is the difference between what is said and what policies are out there and what ideas are out there with the reality. And so, you know, for me as a Black professor, Black female professor at the most diverse institution in the country in terms of student population, it's really fantastic when I get in the classroom and I see the diversity, but then when I get to the faculty meeting, it's just me, okay? And so for me, that is the disconnect that I tend to have, and I don't know how to deal with that, is lots of initiative, lots of conversations happening, lots of people interviewing me about what needs to be done, but every year it's still just me. And so that's I don't know the solution for how to make that change. It just feels like it's a very big institutional ingrained problem that little old Anastasia by herself can't fix. And that is how sometimes I feel. But then on the other hand, I do feel like showing up, doing what I can, and being a part of the conversation is important. But ultimately that disconnect between the conversations and then my actual day-to-day reality is the challenge.
I'll piggyback on that, Anastasia, and say that when Lisa was talking about the last time we were together about educate. Education is so important. Educating not just white people, educating other white people, you know, or Black women being the sole educators of, you know, their white peers or white counterparts, whether they be men or women. But it's beyond the education. It's being an advocate for populations that you see who are in trouble. One of my mentors is a white woman, a white CEO in Girl Scouting, who saw something in me and said, okay, what experiences can I offer you? Can I give you? Can I support you? And so that you can get the things to fill the gap. We talked about that the last time we were on. It's also her being an upstander for me in those rooms and not just standing by and letting things happen, as well as the investment that she was willing to make in me. I have to be willing to make the investment myself in my education and stand up and advocate for myself. I teach girls all the time about using their voice. I have to do the same, advocating for the things that I want for myself, my family, my council is critical. It's the everyday of this job. Advocating for girls and women's issues is part of what Girl Scouts is all about. But the investment, when you don't have the money, it's hard to make an investment. Think about making an investment in yourself when you don't see the green in your hand or see the green in your bank. But I encourage people to think about investment beyond the dollar bill. What investment of time and talents can you share with an underserved population or an underserved group of people that you are then paying it forward, and you're holding yourself to the standard that you can set. So educate, advocate, be an upstander, not a bystander, and invest. We did a campaign a couple of years ago in Girl Scouting, and it went something like this: invest in girls, change the world. Very simple statement. So I would encourage anyone who's listening or anyone who tunes into this, a year from now, challenge them to say, what are you doing to educate yourself? What are you doing to advocate for women and Black women in particular? And how are you investing your time, your talents, your treasure into women of color?
I think
that's so great. I want to pull that thread a little more in terms of what, like, Lisa's question, because part of it is building those trusting relationships. Those are most naturally done with people that are like homogeneous to you. Regardless of like your starting point, who you are, it's like people familiar to you, people similar to you, whether it's culturally or whatever that dimension is. That's probably the most natural thing, because that's like how you sort of grow up, or how you are, how you show up in life. And then you get into this professional space where it's like, how do I represent connections in a diverse way? And so one thing we've talked about at JPMorgan Chase are things like professional intimacy. How do you get to building trusting relationships with people that are not like you? And that allow you to then build what Natasha's talking about, things like advocacy and the goodwill in the relationship, so that they feel comfortable, confident, satisfied with advocating for you when you're not in the room. And those require extensions on both sides. It requires vulnerability on both sides to embrace that kind of relationship. And it requires work. It requires investment, as Natasha said. It requires creating space in your life to welcome these kinds of nuances. And there are so many dimensions that you can find similarities on, whether it be the school you went to or interests, right? The sports is always a great music, as Cheryl mentioned. There's so many common.
Or apparently your sorority.
Well, and there's so many things that can be common ground. So I usually say to people, find the common ground as a conversation piece. And from there, it can build and grow. And you'll be surprised at what you learn about yourself, about others, and how it just enriches your life, period. And that's the power of diversity as well, the ability to navigate these spaces and then be able to feel confident. Like, I know Cheryl feels confident traveling to other countries because she's done it, right? Just think of the people who never left their block, right? And what that means. But Cheryl then feeling confident for anyone who travels. I know for me, once I went to India for the first time, it was just like, wow. And then going multiple times. And like, I can talk about that experience in a way that when I manage a team that's primarily based there, it's very relevant. I can make different kinds of connections. And I think that's really important, like how others can show up is by extending themselves to learn and to create those professionally intimate relationships. And it can only be with a small group, right? You can't do that with everybody because you don't have enough time. So you have to think about who that is going to be with and invest that time.
Muted. I could go on all day about this because this is something that I really think about, because my motto is the only person you can change is yourself. So you need to work on yourself, because right now, all of us here, all 5, or maybe even all those people who are listening to this discussion, you need to be there to represent yourself. You have to be, you have to have the confidence. And Anastasia, you're in that room, you may be the only black person, but when they see you come in that room, they know that you're there and they know that you're arrived. This is your place. And because you're going to be representing us, you're there as our representation, you have to deliver. You have to make sure that you deliver. Mark you, what happens then is that we may even have to go over and above the others in that room, but we have to represent ourselves. We have to represent our women. We have to teach, and we as women, we are subtle in that we do not actually tell people, but we're actually teaching. So in another man or a white man or a woman in that room, they will know that, okay, something is different about this individual. Something is good about this individual. I need more of this individual in this room to diversify, to see how I speak. So what it means also is that we are there in that room to advocate for the others that are outside of that room, to also bring them in. Now, if we go and we dilly-dally and we waste time and we do not produce, we are giving ourselves and our race a discredit and a woman. So we have to represent, and at the same time, look out for those who are outside of that room, who can deliver as well and bring them to the table. We are the ones, we are there, so we need to make sure that we are, and as I said, I know how I went through in terms of my days with children and working and everything. I had a network. It is a different world now. COVID, it has even changed things even more. So we need to be there, to be looking out for others. Please, as women, we have to depend on our men. We have to depend on our white men. We have to depend on our white women. But we must also have that confidence to know that, as Natasha said, we are educated. We know what we're doing. We're not a token. Put that word aside. We're not a token. We're there. We earned our place at the table. As Natasha said last week, last session, she pulled up her folding chair and made the space for herself. So please, as women, look out for the other women. And in looking out for the other woman, that means Black women in particular, because we're at the bottom of the line, but that does not mean that we forget about our men, our children, the other races, Asians, because everyone has their story. You never ever know what others are going through, but please, we need to be looking out for each other, mentor them, make sure that they are learning. Toka, you are an excellent, in terms of your field, make sure other women are there. Work with Natasha in our Girl Scout to make sure that those girls that she's dealing with are also educated that the sky is the limit. They can do anything, including what you are doing. Natasha, you have the forum to mold and mentor these girls. Use it to the best of your ability. Lisa, you're head of the Women's Center. There are tons of women, not only Black, because I'm advocating for everyone now, because everyone has the seat at the table. We need to make sure that we find our place And we leave no one behind. No one is to be left behind. So Lisa, you have an excellent platform at Rutgers that you can use. And Anastasia, you are there in the entrepreneur field. We need women now as business leaders. We need women to be energized to know that we can do it, whether black or white.
I want to know where you are preaching at on Sunday, because that is totally where I need to be.
I know. I said to Anastasia, I was like, I think we need to wrap this up, but maybe we don't. Maybe Cheryl just did it for us.
I know, she sure did. She sure did.
But I think we really are almost out of time. So I just want to at least recap and leave with like one last question where you might just get to say a couple sentences or not. People attest, yes, we needed that, Cheryl. But today, I think this conversation gave us a lot of insight into what resistance might look like. And because of the station in life where you women are, it was less about the resistance and reacting to it, but sharing with us the strategies that you have employed that have worked for you, in terms of, what psychological safety looks like, how to, not take things personally, how to make sure that your seat at the table, you're not unsure of it within yourself, right? And staying there. Also, you do this through your reliance on your support networks, on setting boundaries, on balancing, bringing your whole network, your whole team, your whole tribe to the table, and relying on that and reminding yourself to stick to those boundaries that are flexible, right? So you monitor it and it may ebb and change over time. And also talking about the role of then also having advocacy. So yes, we are there, people are advocating for you. We need to see that happening, but then we also are then have to advocate and think about our roles at the table and advocating for others. So there's a lot that is happening here in terms of taking care of ourselves so we can be at the table, and then also so that we can make room for others at the table, drawing on these various strategies. So I thank you all for sharing today openly, for laying it out, and being specific in your examples. I really believe that sharing your story and being transparent is insightful to those that are joining us today and witnessing this. So I thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to share one thing, because in continuing with thank you, I just want to put up our sponsors, because without these partner companies, we couldn't bring these virtual events to you. So I just wanted to give a shout out to all of our sponsor companies as well. And a couple housekeeping items to close out. We have a couple other events coming up. This is Women's History Month. Women's History Month, Black History Month is not the only time when we should be talking about women, talking about Black women. This should be a launching point for us to continue throughout the rest of the year. And so the theme this month is Choose to Challenge. So I challenge everyone here to choose how you are all going to challenge yourself, challenge the system, challenge each other to advance all of us, as Cheryl was saying as well. Thalia Mingo, who happens to be on our board of advisors at the Center for Women in Business, was shouting out so many amazing tidbits. She also heads up the Bristol Myers, the BMS Women's Initiative there. Be curious. I loved the quote of not throwing down a ladder, but throwing down a fishing net, was really, really impactful. One of the other things I want to leave everybody with is March. So two things. One, March 23rd, you will all get an email. There's another event in conjunction with Women's History Month, celebrating Women's History Month, honoring Rutgers women through the Rutgers University Foundation, Rutgers wide event that will be on the 23rd, a day before March 24th, next Wednesday. Next Wednesday is Rutgers Giving Day. We talk about how we can help. It also happens to be Equal Pay Day. White women make 82 cents on the dollar of a white man. Black women make 70 something cents. Latinas make 60 something cents. So to close that gap, we're launching a campaign called Her Story. Every story told is a story closer to closing that gap in pay and representation. So join us in this as well. We also talked about mentoring a little bit here. The Center for Women in Business has an incredible group mentoring program that we just launched for mid-career women that's very diverse. Toka talked about diverse networks, not diverse from background, but also from industry experience. And so that is all really important. And then one other thing to put on your calendars that's going to be coming, May is Mental Health Month. And we are almost finalized lining up an incredible discussion, not only of mental health, but to practice. I think, Toka, you're the one who's doing the meditation. I need to do more of it. And also learned that I should not be having my thinking time when it's be my sleeping time. So thank you for all of those tidbits as well. But stay tuned for that event as well. And one other thing to close is we talk about how all of us can help advance each other. One of the things I heard through an event I attended the other day was the CEO of Lululemon. And what he said was, what I have learned over the last year is, you know, we always want to have action, how we can help. And what I learned is the most important thing I can do right now is to listen. And that listening is actually acting. And that was a really big aha. And I think I want to end there and close it with that we all need to listen more, to learn as part of all of our journeys. I want to thank all of you. Anastasia, such a pleasure to moderate. We're going to definitely be doing this again together. Natasha and Cheryl and Toka for sharing your stories, your insight, your inspiration. I think, you know, Anastasia and I, in addition to everyone else, got a great lesson, and it's fun for the teachers to be the students. So we appreciate that as well. So thank you all.